Is Agile dead? What is the future of Scrum? Agile, are we in a phase of disillusionment? What is the path to enlightenment? How will we eliminate the Agile theater that accumulated through many years of unsustainable Scrum Agile adoption growth? Specifically, what is the future of Scrum Masters, Agile coaches? Welcome to the Scaling with Agility, the podcast for leaders who aim to close the curtain on all the Agile theater BS and instead use a principled, nuanced approach to agility that achieves outcomes and drives impact. I'm Yuval. So what is the future of Scrum Masters, Agile coaches? More and more leaders are starting to see these as accountabilities rather than discrete roles. They realize that the sort of leadership Scrum Mastery entails should be integrated rather than provided by a dedicated. The Scrum Guide for Leaders goes into the considerations in more depth. That's a companion that I wrote a couple of years ago to help leaders understand, get ideas, some patterns for how to use Scrum, how to map Scrum to their organization. One example is the VP of engineering in a growing startup who decided to take on the SAFe RTE role, which is essentially the chief Scrum Master for the Agile release train, since they felt it was up to them to provide this leadership. Remember, Scrum accountabilities does not equate Agile roles. Remember, Scrum accountabilities does not equate Scrum roles. This way of thinking is supported by the 2020 Scrum Guide update that changes the language from Scrum roles to Scrum accountabilities. SAFe also sees itself as a dual operating system that runs parallel to the organizational structure, which means that the Scrum Master and other roles should be seen as accountabilities. When leaders take these new ways of leading and showing up to heart, it creates a healthy and sustainable level of agility. But getting there requires support and coaching. Sometimes you do need someone dedicated to agility. Sometimes you don't. It really depends on the situation of the team. There are situations where no one is passionate about organizational performance, health, agility, and development. In these contexts, the right move is, or might be, to have a person dedicated to these accountabilities. But most of the time, these people are brought in to become part of the leadership team of a larger group rather than a team level role. So what does the reduction in force of Agile roles that we're seeing out there in the industry mean? Is laying off all Agile roles a sign that a company has achieved Agile nirvana? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. What we're seeing right now in the market is more often one of these scenarios. First one might be that the company woke up to the reality that they are doing Agile rather than being Agile and see the Agile roles as part of the problem. Companies that believe in their Agile way of working and have achieved a reasonable level of agility want to continue to improve. But when looking to extend their runway in the current macroeconomic environment, they make the tough but necessary decision, in their view, to spend less on the future of work, on more and more on doing current work. Another scenario we often see is change in leadership and the loss of a formal or informal Agile champion that leads to a shift in perspective about agility. I had a chat yesterday with a client of mine that shared with me they are going to switch roles from a sort of a COO role for their organization to a role more focused on a specific challenge that the company is facing now. Their belief, their assumption is that the work that they've done, the stewardship that they've provided to the organization to nurture the agility culture, the approach to self-management and adaptability, that is strong enough in the organization that regardless of who comes to replace them, the culture would be sustainable. The stewardship culture would be sustainable. And indeed, I've seen situations where that is the case. But a lot of the time, all we've relied upon is agility by mandate, by inflicting a process change on people. If that has been the approach of the transformation leaders or even Scrum Masters and Agile coaches that have been encouraged or even told to enforce a process. The moment we take that away, that would be the moment that that we would lose momentum about agility. So in those types of environments, when the agile champion leaves, this would lead to a shift in perspective and investment in agility. Another scenario is companies where people in agile roles are making an impact, but either don't care or struggle to provide transparency to this impact in a way that will resonate with business people. Think the CFO. In the current context, this isn't a very sustainable strategy. And that's why I've been talking recently so much about focusing on outcomes and impact and connecting whatever it is that you're doing, whatever activities, deliverables, events, artifacts, connecting them to expensive problems that the organization is facing. So my recommendation to you, if you're in one of these agile or generally enablement roles, whether you call the Scrum Master, RTE, Agile Coach, Product Ops, I recommend you focus on a couple of things. I suggest what I've seen work is people that focus on improving the effectiveness and results, the outcomes and impact created by your team, your agile release train, your whole organization in a way that is impactful to the business, ideally in a quantifiable way. Try to understand what is the constraint. Where would an investment move the needle for things that the business cares about? This is where things like evidence-based management can come in handful, or the work on outcome mapping or impact mapping, whatever you use. We have a lot of tools that help us connect to value. Let's do that for our work as well. Let's not focus on agile as a checklist. Let's focus on agility as a way to drive outcome and impact. It might be frightening. It is a frightening time for agilists. But despite what you think you might hear, one thing you should consider asking your team, your stakeholders, your leadership is a question that is used in Netflix, the keeper question. How hard would you fight to keep me? The answer in the conversation might be tough to hear, and maybe you should start with asking it yourself in front of the mirror. But it will provide the transparency you need to inspect and adapt your focus. Are you a keeper? What should you do in order to become a keeper? If you're in a big organization with a formal or informal agile role community of practice, I recommend you make this a topic you work on together. How do you become a keeper role in the organization? What are the shifts? What are some things you just stop doing in order to become keepers? The optimistic in me hopes that as a community, we will use whatever's going on right now as a wake-up call that will positively impact what we focus on and the value we bring to organizations. So that we focus less on training, certification, the vanity of agile, whether that's story points, burn down chart. We talk a lot about agile theater, right? So, you know my perspective there. But instead that we will start to focus on outcomes, start to focus on how do we find the right mix of enablement, support, leadership. Essentially what we're talking about here is the sort of leadership we want to see in an organization driving agility. My opinion is it's pretty clear, and I've seen that in organizations that I work with. We will see fewer people in agile roles. I think if you look at the team level or even group level roles, we will see instead of people in these roles, we will see these as accountabilities that the leaders, existing leaders of these groups take on, whether it's team leaders, program managers, development managers, VPs. Those people will start to take on more and more of the Scrum Mastery, Agile coaching, accountabilities, and will provide leadership to the organization. And this would be complemented by organizational level Scrum Mastery, coaching, agility capabilities. The larger the organization, the more it makes sense for it to have an internal consultancy, shared service, an agility or transformation. It's hard, you want to call it that. I think that's what I've been seeing in more and more organizations, and that's where I think the future of the agility accountabilities is going. You've been listening to the Scaling with Agility podcast. I'm Yuval.